4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday is the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the whole world is holding its breath. But that silence didn't just break, it shattered when my front door nearly flew off its hinges under the kick of a designer heel. And there she was, standing in the frame like some manic vision in silk pajamas, screaming at the top of her lungs that she had master key authority while waving a piece of plastic in my face. Her name was Brenda Vance, the self-appointed queen of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, and she decided that tonight was the night she'd finally, in quote, put the soldier boy in his place, in quote. But what Brenda forgot, or maybe what she never bothered to understand, was that she wasn't in Oppos. T just breaking into a house. She was triggering a tactical response from two 90-pound shadows that had survived the worst of the Middle East, and as my retired K9s, Maverick and Ghost, lunged from. The darkness in full protection mode, the look of absolute, soul-crushing terror on her face told me that her, in quote, authority, in quote, didn't in Oppos mean a damn thing to a pair of war-hardened German shepherds who only saw a threat to their family. My name is Elias Thorne. I'm 52, and after 23 years as a military police investigator, I thought I'd seen every kind of crazy the world had to offer, from black market smugglers in Kabul to internal corruption cases that would make your skin crawl. So when my wife, Sarah, who's a saint and a trauma nurse at the local VA, and I decided to settle down in this gated, in quote, paradise, in quote, I figure my biggest stressor would be choosing the right mulch for the flower beds. We wanted a place for our daughters, Lily and Grace, to feel safe, a place with a yard big enough for Maverick and Ghost to live out their retirement in peace. Because these dogs aren't in Oppos. Just pets, they're veterans, with Maverick still twitching in his sleep from mortar fire memories, and Ghost missing a patch of fur on his flank from a roadside bomb that nearly took us both out. But within a week of moving in, I realized I'd traded the battlefield for something much more insidious. The suburban ego of a woman who treated property values like a holy crusade. Brenda Vance didn't in Oppos. Just run the HOA. She was the HOA, having bullied her way into the presidency for nearly a decade by making life a living hell for anyone who dared to question her. And I'll never forget our first, in quote, meeting, in quote, when she clicked up my driveway in stilettos that cost more than my first truck, smelling like a chemical spill at a perfume factory, and looked at Maverick, who was literally just lying in the shade of an oak tree, and told me that, in quote, aggressive breeds and, quote, we're a blight on the community and Oppos. Aesthetic. I tried to be the bigger man, I really did, pulling on every ounce of de-escalation training. I had to explain that they were certified service animals and highly trained professionals, but she just laughed that cold, brittle laugh and told me that, in quote, emotional support theater, in quote, didn't in Oppos. T-Fly and Whispering Pines, handing me a, in quote, violation notice, in quote, printed on cheap paper that looked like it came from a middle school computer lab, charging me $300 for, in quote, unauthorized structures, in quote, which turned out to be the specialized agility ramps I'd built to help Maverick keep his joints moving as he aged. The thing about people like Brenda is that they don into Oppos. Just want you to follow the rules. They want you to feel small. And over the next few months, she turned her personal vendetta into a full-scale siege, filing false noise complaints at 2 p.m. when the house was empty, calling animal control to report, in quote, vicious behavior, in quote. That never happened, and eventually the most disgusting move of all, contacting Child Protective Services with a, quote, tip, in quote, that my military-related PTSD made me a danger to my own daughters. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, looking at the official government paperwork she'd triggered, feeling a type of cold, calculated rage I hadn't in Oppos. Felt since I was in uniform, and as Sarah held our sobbing youngest daughter because the neighbor's kids were told our family was, in quote, unstable, in quote, I knew the time for being the bigger man was over, because Brenda had just made the mistake of bringing the war to a man who knew exactly how to win one. And I started turning my home into a fortress of evidence, installing 4K thermal cameras hidden in the eaves and vibration sensors along the fence line that could pick up a cat in Oppos as heartbeat, let alone a trespassing HOA president. But as I started digging into the, in quote, why, in quote, behind her obsession, thanks to a few late-night sessions with my old intelligence contacts and some forensic accounting help from our neighbor Marcus, who'd also been on Brenda's hit list, the picture started to look a lot less like a grumpy neighbor and a lot more like a criminal enterprise. We found out that Brenda was an oppos. T just a, in quote, concerned citizen, in quote. She was a failing real estate broker whose personal accounts were hemorrhaging money, and she'd been using the HOAs, in quote, maintenance fund, in quote, as her own personal piggy bank to keep her McMansion out of foreclosure. But the real kicker, the, in quote, nuclear, in quote, discovery, was that she was secretly partnered with a shady development group called Blackwood Holdings, and her job was to, end quote, clear the path, end quote, by harassing families, specifically veterans or those with high-equity homes, until they got so miserable they'd sell for pennies on the dollar, allowing her partners to flip the houses for a massive profit that she got a cut of. She'd done it 3 times before we moved in, driving out a Navy family and an elderly couple who'd lived there for 30 years, but she'd never run into someone who could subpoena bank records or track the digital footprint of a kickback scheme. And as the evidence pile grew, I realized she was getting desperate, which leads us back to that 4 a.m. break-in when she finally snapped. She thought that, in quote, master key, in quote, she'd illegally copied from the developer's office would give her the power to, in quote, catch me in a violation, in quote, or maybe plant something to finally get the dogs taken away, but she didn't in oppos. T account for the fact that Maverick and Ghost on in oppos. T need a light to see a predator. And the recording from my hidden hallway camera is a masterpiece of cinematic justice. Brenda screaming in terror, her fake key flying across the room as 180 pounds of muscle, and teeth pinned her against the wall without even breaking her skin, just holding her there in a state of absolute, shivering submission until I walked out of my boxers, took a sip of my coffee, and asked her if she'd like to wait for the police or the FBI first. The aftermath was a beautiful, slow-motion wreck for her, because the police didn't end oppos. T just find a trespasser. They found the master key, which led to a search warrant for her home office, which led to the discovery of the Blackwood Holdings contracts and a ledger of the $60,000 she'd embezzled from our community dues over the last 2 years. At the final hearing, the judge didn't end oppos. T just give her a slap on the wrist. He looked at her with pure disgust after seeing the footage of her harassing my children and my service dogs, and he handed down a sentence for felony burglary, wire fraud, and civil rights violations that's going to keep Brenda in a state-issued jumpsuit for at least the next 8 years. Now, the neighborhood is actually quiet for the first time in a decade. The end quote. HOA boss, end quote. Vanity plates are in a scrap heap, and Maverick and Ghost spend their days napping on the porch without a single, end quote, violation notice, end quote, in sight, but it makes me wonder about all the other, end quote, Brendas, end quote, out there running their little fiefdoms. Is it ever really about the rules, or is it always just about the power and the money hidden behind a, end quote, perfect, end quote, lawn? Would you have stayed and fought a woman like that, knowing she could destroy your reputation, or is there a point where a, end quote, peaceful neighborhood, end quote, just ISN and oppos? T worth the war? Let me know in the comments if you've ever dealt with a, end quote, Karen, end quote, who thought she was above the law, because I'm starting to think the real predators aren't in oppos. T the ones in the woods, but the ones holding the clipboards.